Close your eyes and imagine a place where an entire town of people vanished into thin air. No signs of struggle, no bodies, no clues. Just one single chilling word carved into a wooden post. Croatoan. Tonight, we journey back to the year 1587, to the edge of a dark, uncharted new world, a place called Roanoke Island. What happened to the souls who lived there? Sit back, let the darkness consume the room, and listen closely as we uncover America's oldest and most terrifying unsolved mystery. Chapter 1: The Voyage into the Unknown. The year was 1587. The Atlantic Ocean was unforgiving, tossing the wooden ships like autumn leaves in a violent wind. Over 100 English men, women, and children stared out into the endless gray horizon. They were leaving behind everything they knew: the cobblestone streets of London, the safety of their homes, to chase a dream of a new life in a land they called Virginia. Among them was John White, a man of art and leadership, appointed to govern this new colony. Beside him stood his pregnant daughter, Eleanor. They knew the risks. The seas were swallowed by thick fog, and the night brought a cold that crept deep into their bones. For months, the only sounds were the creaking of the ship's timber and the relentless crashing of the waves. They prayed for land. They prayed for survival. And then, out of the morning mist, the shores of Roanoke Island appeared. It looked like paradise, thick green forests stretching as far as the eye could see, calm blue waters, and the sweet scent of pine in the air. But paradise can be deceptive. As the anchor dropped with a heavy splash, a strange silence fell over the crew. The forest was too quiet. No birds sang. No wind moved the leaves. It was as if the island itself was holding its breath, waiting for them to step ashore. Chapter 2: The Birth of Virginia Dare and the Growing Shadows. In the beginning, there was hope. Small wooden houses were built, and the smoke from chimneys began to rise above the trees. On August 18th, just weeks after landing, Eleanor gave birth to a beautiful baby girl. They named her Virginia Dare. She was the very first English child born on American soil. John White looked at his granddaughter and felt a deep sense of pride. But that pride was short-lived. The supplies they brought from England were running out faster than expected. The winter was approaching, and the soil was difficult to harvest. Worse, the shadow of fear began to grow. The local tribes watched them from the deep woods, unseen but always felt. Footprints would appear near the colony boundaries at night, only to vanish into the swamp by morning. The colonists grew desperate. They realized they would not survive the winter without help from home. With a heavy heart, the colonists begged John White to return to England. They needed food, tools, and soldiers. White didn't want to leave his daughter and his newborn granddaughter, but he knew he had no choice. Before he stepped back onto the ship, he made a strict pact with the settlers. He told them, If you must leave this island due to danger, carve the name of your destination into a tree or a post. And if you are attacked, carve a cross above the name. White sailed away, watching the shores of Roanoke grow smaller and smaller until they disappeared. He promised to return in a few months. He had no idea that he would never see his family alive again. John White arrived in England, but the world had turned to chaos. A massive war had broken out between England and Spain. Every single ship was seized by the Queen for battle. White begged. He pleaded with the authorities, screaming that his daughter and granddaughter were starving on a distant, lonely island. But his cries fell on deaf ears. 1 year passed, then 2, then 3 long, agonizing years. 3 years of winter nights where John White stared into his fireplace, wondering, was little Virginia Dare still breathing? Were they freezing in the dark? Every tick of the clock felt like a drop of hot oil on his soul. He was helpless, trapped across a vast, violent ocean. Finally, in August of 1590, the war cleared. White managed to secure a rescue ship. As the boat drew closer to the shores of Roanoke Island, his heart pounded against his chest like a trapped bird. It was evening. The sun was dipping below the horizon, bleeding a deep, blood-red color across the sky. He was finally back. But as he looked toward the shore, a cold dread washed over him. Chapter 4. The Silent Island. From the deck of the ship, White saw a plume of smoke rising from the island. Hope flared in his chest. They were alive. They were cooking supper. He quickly jumped into a rowboat with his men, shouting into the dark, calling out his daughter's name. "Eleanor! Eleanor! It's your father!" But no one answered. The only reply was the echoing of his own desperate voice bouncing off the dark trees. When their boots hit the sand, the smoke they had seen turned out to be a cruel illusion. Just a random brush fire, burning silently in the dark. White lit a lantern, its pale light cutting through the thick, heavy mist. They walked toward the settlement. The grass had grown high, swallowing the paths. They reached the place where the wooden houses once stood. What they found made their blood run cold. The houses were gone, completely dismantled. Not destroyed by fire, not smashed by war, but carefully taken apart, as if the people had packed up and left. There was nothing. No clothes, no tools, no footsteps. Just an eerie, suffocating emptiness. A whole colony of over 100 people had simply dissolved into the shadows of the forest. John White stood in the center of the abandoned fort, the wind howling through the empty gaps where houses once stood. His lantern flickered, casting long, dancing shadows against the wooden walls. He was losing hope. His family was gone. But then, one of his men shouted from the edge of the woods, "Governor, over here, look at this!" White ran through the tall grass, his heart pounding in his chest. He pushed past the branches and stopped dead in his tracks. The lantern light fell upon a massive wooden post, part of the fort's entrance. Someone had carved letters into the wood. Deep, sharp marks, cut with a heavy knife. White leaned closer, his eyes widening in the dim light. The letters spelled out a single word. Croatoan. There was no cross carved above it. Remember the pact? A cross meant danger. A cross meant an attack. But there was no cross, just the word. Croatoan. White felt a wave of confusion wash over him. Was this a message of hope? Or a final, desperate cry before they vanished into the dark? Chapter 6. The Tree of Whispers. They searched further, stepping deeper into the ancient, silent forest. A few yards away, they found another clue. On the trunk of a massive tree, the bark had been stripped away, and 3 letters were carved. C-R-O. White remembered that Croatoan was the name of a nearby island, home to a peaceful Native American tribe that had been friendly to them before. Did his daughter Eleanor, his granddaughter Virginia Dare, and the rest of the colony pack up and move to that island? It seemed like the only logical answer. But the night was growing colder, and a fierce storm was brewing on the horizon. The waves were crashing violently against the shore, threatening to destroy their ships. White's men were terrified. They refused to go any further into the dark, unknown woods. They begged the governor to return to the ship before the storm swallowed them alive. White looked back at the tree, the letters C-R-O seeming to whisper in the dark. He had to make a choice. Go back to safety, or chase the ghosts of his family into the storm. The storm hit Roanoke Island with a terrifying fury. The wind screamed through the ancient trees, tearing leaves and branches from the canopy. John White and his men retreated to their boats, the freezing rain blinding their eyes. They managed to reach the main ship just as the waves grew into massive, watery walls. White planned to sail south toward Croatoan Island the very next morning to search for his family. He clung to that hope. But the ocean had other plans. During the night, the brutal storm snapped the ship's heavy anchor cables. The vessel was pushed violently out into the deep, open sea, away from the safety of the coast. Food was running low. The ship's fresh water supply was contaminated with sea salt, and the crew was on the verge of a mutiny. They were too weak, too terrified to turn back toward the unknown islands. The captain gave the order. They had no choice but to sail east, back toward England. White stood at the edge of the ship, watching the dark silhouette of the American continent fade into the gray mist. He was leaving his heart behind. Chapter 8. A Broken Man. John White never made it back to Roanoke Island. He spent the rest of his days in England, a broken man with a hollow soul. Every night before he closed his eyes, he saw the face of his daughter, Eleanor. He heard the imagined cries of little Virginia Dare, lost in a wild, dark world. He died a few years later, taking the secret of the colony to his grave. For centuries, the fate of the 100 colonists remained a ghost story whispered around campfires. Did they starve? Were they captured? Or did they truly join the Croatoan tribe, blending into the native culture until their English identities faded away like smoke in the wind? The years rolled on, and the forest grew over the empty fort, burying the wooden post, the carved tree, and the truth deep beneath the soil. But the mystery didn't end there. Years later, new settlers arrived in the area, and they began to hear whispers in the dark. Decades passed. The year was now 1607, and a new group of English settlers arrived in Virginia to establish Jamestown. They had heard the legends of the Lost Colony of Roanoke, but to them, it was just an old sailor's tale, a story told to frighten children before bed. They cleared the land, cut down trees, and began to build. But the land had a memory. Soon, strange rumors